His was the only boat to arrive.
I think maybe it was a cow. I don't know.
There's the thank you letter from Lyndon Johnson.
There was even a monorail at one point to the east of us.
Plus, everybody forgets about pirates.
This is the coolest field trip I have ever been on.
I don't know, but I've been told, keep on dancing, won't ever get old.
Hello and welcome to the Long Island History Project, the podcast that brings you stories and interviews with people passionate about Long Island history. You can hear them all at longislandhistoryproject.org. My name is Chris Kretz. I am your host, and our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band. This is Chubby Jackson in a 1998 oral history interview.
But I think people should know that poor bass players they've always been the little hidden guy on the bandstand. Am I right?
Yeah.
Now follow me. They play like this.
He's playing an imaginary bass.
That was the bass player. Well, I decided from the first night that I played out on Long Island that...
He slaps his ass and gives a flourish with a big smile.
Was the answer. Because you know what it is? It's like an equation, Monk. It's like X plus Y equals Z. X is your playing ability. Mm-hmm. Y is the way you present it. And Z is the resultant of a good performance, right?
Today we are telling the story of the life and music of Greig Stewart Chubby Jackson. Son of vaudeville parents, child of Freeport, master of the five-string bass. For one night only, I've put together a band of experts, each with a piece of the story to tell. I'll introduce you to each of them in turn. We're going to play this one straight through, no outro, so let me just tell you up front. Any music you hear is courtesy of the Free Sound Project. You'll find full credits and links to related resources in our show notes at longislandhistoryproject.org. And I'd like to thank Monk Rowe and the Fillius Jazz Archives at Hamilton College for their use of the oral history with Chubby. So now let's kick things off. We're going to go back to Freeport in Nassau County, start talking some local history, and making it swing.
This is Regina Feeney. I am the librarian and archivist at the Freeport Memorial Library. And I am also the Village of Freeport's historian.
First of all, Regina, this could be dangerous to librarians with a stack of research in front of them. But as a first question, had you heard of Chubby Jackson before?
I have heard his name in passing, but I didn't know that much about him. And okay. I just found out that he grew up like 3 blocks away from where I am right now.
Oh, that's great. So let's start. What do you want to tell us about Freeport just to set the scene in terms of where you are and maybe just a quick history up until the 1900s?
So Freeport, it was settled in 1659, and by 1839, it becomes this destination location. In fact, we're often described as a place where hunters and fishermen would come. In 1853, Freeport actually becomes Freeport. And the funny thing about that is we have no evidence of there ever being a port. So we had very good marketing even back then. Things really start to change in 1867. That's when the railroad comes to Freeport, and Freeport really does start to become a destination location. And I'll say that the first member of the theater community that we can find in Freeport was John Stromberg. And he came to Freeport around 1900. And if that name doesn't sound familiar, he was a composer of popular music and was the music director of Weber and Fields. It starts to really build up after 1910. And 1910 is when the East River Tunnel opens up. So you can actually get into New York City, Manhattan, very quickly. You didn't have to stop change and get on a subway or get on a ferry to get into New York City. So Freeport starts to become the Hamptons before the Hamptons. And in fact, they start a actors club in Freeport about 1915 called the Lights Club, which was Long Island Good-Hearted Thespian Society.
Okay, and then maybe this is where we can compare some notes. So we're talking the life of Chubby Jackson, but his parents were vaudeville performers. His father was Stewart Greig Jackson, His mother went under the stage name, I think, of Dorothy Wall, but they were working with Victor Stone, so they were going by the name of Stone, Wall, and Jackson.
Yes, that I saw too, yes.
So that's about 1912, I think, was the earliest I saw performing ragtime and dancing and singing. What else did you uncover anything about their vaudeville performance days?
Nothing I could really find. I just know that he died very suddenly, and there's nothing really written about it.
Yeah, so they were a dance comedy act, or music and singing. The few things I found, it's interesting. A couple of different articles refer to them as clever and innovative. It's hard to imagine what these acts were like. I think of almost like a Saturday Night Live sketch or something, where they're performing and singing. But yeah, so Chubby was born 1918 in the city. And then I believe I see them on the 1920 census in Freeport. Do you see them any earlier than that?
No.
Okay. And the father dies less than a year, I think, after Chubby is born. You said that Lights Club existed. So does it make sense that the widow of a vaudeville act would find comfort out there or shelter?
Yeah, we've identified over 500 actors and theater people. So it's not just actors, it was comedians, it was acrobats, it was the musicians, it was composers, all living in and around Freeport. And in joining the club, Freeport gets far-reaching publicity. So you could see where people would be coming in because they heard about it. And there would have been a support group there amongst the actors. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me that his family would have ended up here. There's a line that you might want to use. It was from a 1949 article, and it says, talking about describing Chubby as a press agent's dream. And it could be said that he was born backstage and took his first toddling steps behind the footlights. His parents were both headliners in the theatrical world, and his grandmother and aunt held degrees in music, and his mother, Miss Dorothy Jackson, WGBB radio star, helped guide his career.
My mother was in vaudeville for 42 years. My real father died at an age of 29. He was in a Broadway show at the Winter Garden Theater in New York called A Girl from Brazil. So I came from a family of performers. Da.
So if Chubby was born in 1918, so he's growing up through the 20s. He's a teenager going into high school in the early 30s. What can you tell us about what Freeport was like in the 20s? What picture can you paint of Chubby's early surroundings there?
Well, so Freeport becomes nuts during Prohibition. Liquor was coming in every which way. We have arrest records for the time period of Prohibition, and nearly 1/3 of arrests from 1920 to 1933 in Freeport were alcohol related. So this was a fun time in Freeport. The other thing we're going to see, too, beginning about 1916, is the growth of the African-American community in the village through the Great Migration. And African-Americans are settling in an area known as Bennington Park, and very progressive in the 1920s. And so Chubby would have attended school, because the schools weren't segregated, with African-Americans. And we know about in the 1930s, a club was founded in Freeport it was started as the Cotton Inn, but it eventually became the Celebrity Club, and it hosted a lot of acts. So that was kind of the environment that he would have experienced.
And it's interesting because the later years where there's more documentation, he's got a reputation of always going to see acts and finding new musicians. And, he's the guy that's always out at some club listening to some new act. So it's interesting that it might date back to Freeport.
Yeah, and there were a lot of clubs. I mean, there were a lot of theaters. Obviously, in a community that had a lot of theater people, there seemed to be a lot of performances going on. And so many of his classmates went into the music industry.
Arnold Fishkin, who was a bass player, my closest friend, he was 15 or 16, and he was playing with Bunny Berrigan already, you hear? And I used to go hang out in Long Island, some club, I can't think of the name, big club, where Bunny's band played, and I became Bunny's gopher. Get me a pack of cigarettes, and that was the first nickname. It was Bunny, but I was so attracted to the musicians, the way they talked, the way they attempted to live.
So now we see Chubby in the mid-1930s. He's hanging out at these clubs. He's meeting professional musicians. He's getting a taste of the lifestyle. And this is smack dab in the middle of the swing era. Big dance halls, syncopation. And to help explain it all, we're going to bring in guest number 2.
Well, I'm Scott Yanow. I'm a jazz journalist and historian. Been writing about jazz since the mid-'70s. These days, I write for 6 magazines on a regular basis, including Downbeat and Jazzes. And I've written 12 books on jazz and a little bit over 21,000 recordings. And I've written over 950 line-ups. So basically, I listen to jazz all day long and all different styles of it. And it's the main thing I do. I've been doing it for a long time.
Scott, you're the man for the job. I reached out to you because I need jazz explained to me and some context. So we're talking about Chubby Jackson and sort of trying to put his life into context. How did you discover Chubby, and how would you describe his style or his career, would you say?
Anytime anyone listens to the Woody Herman band, the version of it that's called The First Herd that was around from late 1943 until he broke it up in late 46, anyone that listens to that would know about Chubby Jackson to an extent because, well, he was the bassist with the band. He also helped put the band together as far as the band became more modernized because of people he recommended, but also because he was a very colorful figure. He was he was playing bass and, be driving the band that way. He would often start shouting out in the middle of performances, and even on records, maybe in the last chorus or so, he'd be yelling out encouragement to the band, just add to the excitement, because that particular version of Woody Herman's orchestra was a pretty exciting and witty one anyway, so he fit in perfectly.
And just the bass player in the band era, the big band or the swing band era, what was the role of the guy playing the bass? How could you characterize that instrument?
At that point in time, bass players very rarely took solos. They were basically playing on the beat, 4/4, and driving the band. Occasionally on a ballad, they would be heard playing 2 beats, but generally it was 4 to the bar. Every beat they would be stating, where the rhythm was. So that was pretty standard from the swing era, which, began in 1935 and really continued for about a decade.
And so to play bass, the note used to die right away. Yeah. Now, what if I want to play boo da ba doo da doo 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 ah? What if I want? Because that's what's in my soul. Mm-hmm. That doesn't come out of the bass.
It started to loosen up because of Jimmy Blanton, who was Duke Ellington's bassist from 1939 to 41, because he was a major soloist and he was also pretty adventurous in his playing.
When I heard Jimmy Blanton play, he would go ba doo doo da be dum doo go 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 go. When I was saying, hey, that's cute enough to be a solo, and he breathes enough in between notes to make it sound like a solo. So, you know what I'm saying?
So, but Chubby Jackson was basically based in swing, and he developed into a pretty good soloist.
Now, I've seen a lot of evidence. There's some oral histories with him, and just reading through the articles of the day, like you were saying, he was pretty exuberant. I mean, he was a showman, would you say? Because it seemed like he had an entertainer's soul in him, in addition to the musician.
Oh, yes. In fact, Jackson was actually the first jazz musician I ever interviewed, and it was about 1976, 77. When I interviewed him, the main complaint he had about jazz at that time period is he said the musicians looked like they weren't having that much fun. He said that it was up to them to entertain the audience, and they should be smiling all the time. And they should also just love being on stage, because he always did.
You mentioned Woody Herman's band that he was a part of. Was that a big break for him? Was Woody a big name at the time?
Yes. Well, at that point in time, Chubby had several big bands. He played with Raymond Scott, Jan Savitt, Henry Bussey, and then he had spent 2 years with Charlie Barnett. And then in late 1943, he joined Woody Herman. And Woody Herman, he had a hit with Woodchopper's Ball, and his band was fairly popular, but it was like a second-level swing band. It was a good band, but it wasn't on the level of Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Glenn Miller, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, bands like that. So at that point in time, Woody was looking to try to get a different sound, and Chubby Jackson recommended players to him, like tenor saxophonist Flip Phillips and trombonist Bill Harris. players who added to the excitement of the band. And due to that, the band itself became extremely popular. And it was a big break for Chubby Jackson because before that, he wasn't particularly known outside of musicians knowing who he was. But once he was playing with the band, he became kind of a major name.
It's the 1946 Esquire All-American Band, of which they've had a Gold Award, Silver Award, and a New Star, right?
Yeah.
Do me a favor, read the Gold Awards up there while I sit here and play with this toy.
We have quite a lineup here on trumpet, Cootie Williams, Bill Harris on trombone, Benny Carter and Coleman Hawkins on saxophones, Benny Goodman on clarinet, King Cole piano, Oscar Moore guitar, Davy Tuff drums, Chubby Jackson string bass, Red Norvo vibes, and vocalist Louis Armstrong, Mildred Bailey, Ella Fitzgerald, with Duke Ellington arranging.
How do you like that?
I can't imagine you get any better than that.
No. I had forgotten all about that. But you know something so wild about this, Monk? This whole thing was responsible and was the birth of what is now known as the Great Day in Harlem.
Right here?
Yeah, because all these guys were in that photo. And that wasn't called Great Day in Harlem. A lady by the name of Jean Bach put this whole thing together, a lovely lady, too. Yeah. And whoever was available, I mean, Woody was not there because he was out of town. Lionel wasn't there. Duke wasn't there. But if you see that picture, I have a little picture of that with me.
Yeah, we have it.
Oh, you have it? At any rate, it all of a sudden became a Great Day in Harlem.
And through all of this whirlwind period when he's playing with the Woody Herman Band and making his name, he still held on to Freeport, still had a home there, his mother nearby, and there's plenty of places to find him in the record. I found some writing by one of his bandmates, Ralph Burns, who spent the summer of '46 with Chubby in his house, writing, composing, and I guess playing. But he talks about his mother, who was, he calls, the best Jewish cook on Long Island. And he said that he and Chubby just spent the summer with Jones Beach, good food, and good dope. So that's an interesting glimpse into...
That sounds about right.
Another person that stayed with him, it looks like, over the summer of '46 was a pianist, Lenny Tristano.
Yes, he was blind, right?
He could have been, but what I saw was that Chubby kind of led him to form a trio that played at Al White's Town Lodge. Is that a known spot to you?
So Albie White's was a long-time club in Freeport. Actually, the building is still there. It's on Brooklyn Avenue. It's named for Albie White, who had been a vaudevillian, and then later he turned restaurateur. And he left the stage in 1930 and opened Albie White Chateau in Baldwin, and then later opened Albie White's at 10 Brooklyn Avenue in Freeport. And that was, you see that a lot, Chubby going there and performing, even performing with some of his old classmates after he kind of started to make it big time.
Oh, that's great. And in '52, he's playing with Bill Harris at Lou Gaza's Whitman Bowling Lanes in Huntington, a new 32 alley bowling lane where they're playing jazz in the middle of the cocktail lounge. And his mother, just not to leave Mom Jackson out, she was going strong into the 50s. I think she dies in '54, but there's a Newsday ad. She's playing at McCluskey's Steakhouse in Wantagh in '52.
She did a opening act at the Choral House in the late 1940s.
And what's the significance of the Choral House?
The Choral House is just a known place right in Baldwin, right on the Freeport Baldwin border. Still there today.
Yeah, and at one point he opens his own club, Chubby, and it's the Esquire Club in Valley Stream. And digging into that, I didn't realize Valley Stream was so big. Texas Guinan had a club, the famous speakeasy runner and possibly madam or former performer. Were these bands thinking, we're playing swing, or did they think of it as jazz, or like if you were to make a continuum of what we should call the music they were playing at what point?
Well, Woody Herman, basically before that, had a swing band with a lot of vocals, mostly by himself. He was a pretty good singer. And this group became solidified, and the personnel had changed, say, by 1944 into 46. They were a forward-looking swing band that was influenced by bebop. They sometimes crossed over the line into bop. It was swing, but it was influenced to a certain extent by the new innovation, Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker. And it was becoming looser, and the harmonies were getting a little more advanced, and the rhythms weren't quite as obvious as in the swing era. There'd be a lot of different accents that were unexpected.
I'm trying to wrap my head around that transition. So if you have this, if I think of the swing as sort of maybe not commercial, but at least driven to getting the public to get up and dance, and maybe more structured. So bop was sort of coming along at the same time, or developed outside of that.
Bebop came up after swing had been around for about a decade. So it was like the next step in the evolution. And for a variety of reasons, they weren't playing for dancers so much after 46. Chubby Jackson, he joined Charlie Ventura's band. Charlie Ventura was a tenor player who, at that point in time, he had been a swing player, but he was doing his best to have a commercial side of bebop. It didn't last very long, but it was like bop for the people. That was like his slogan. Which is kind of funny. And, for a couple of years, record labels tried to make bebop into a fad. They were thinking, this is the next thing at the swing. We're going to make a lot of money from this. They kept them doing that until the end of 49, pretty much. But so Chubby Jackson, he worked with Charlie Ventura a little bit, and then he put together his own band, and he had some success for maybe a year or so. In fact, his group, which was mostly a septet, featured Harry Gibbs, a great vibraphonist. And they were actually helped introduce bebop to Scandinavia. They went overseas, and they did pretty well there for a little while anyway, during a couple of tours, did some recordings. And then when he came back after a bit of freelancing, he put together his own big band in 1949. It didn't last long, but they did make a few recordings. And then after that, he was basically freelancing. He would get together with some of the Woody Herman alumni, because those were some of his favorite players. On his own in the 1950s, he actually led about 5 albums of Jackson. And then after that, he was less important in the scene after about the early 60s. He actually had a children's television show in the 60s. I think it was in Chicago.
Well, you were into TV yourself.
Oh, yeah, I had a
Tell
kiddie show.
Tell me about Chicago a little
Well, I'll tell you, Duffy was born, he was 4 or 5 weeks old, and I was with Louis Armstrong at the Chicago Theater. And I couldn't leave my wife. And Mino was 2 years older, a little baby, so I had to tell Louis that I couldn't go to London with him. So all of a sudden, I got an offer to go on staff at ABC in Chicago to be the bass player on Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
All right.
You dig this?
Sure.
You wear dum, tiddlum, tiddlum, bum, ba bum, ba bum, papa ti bum, bum. And that's all bass I played. With all the bass I've ever played in my life, that's what I had to play on the Deadwork show. Well, one night, or the day before, Bert Hilton came to me and he said, it's you and me tomorrow. He said, what's the name of the girl that was on the show? Well, anyhow, I wanted you to give Beulah Witch a bass lesson. So on the prosimium, and it's got the little, we rehearsed, we got on the show, we did exactly the opposite of what we'd rehearsed, and it got funny.
This is live, right?
Yeah, live. And all I need is to push a button and say, go nuts. And that's just the very beginning for me.
I hadn't noticed.
La, 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 So all of a sudden, I get a call from a gentleman program director, Danny Shuffman, called me that night and said, Bert Chilstrom just recommended you. Said, we're bringing in a show called The Little Rascals, with Spanky and all of them. And, okay.
So as Chubby enters this new era of his life, as he pivots to becoming a TV personality, that's our cue to bring on our third guest.
I'm JaiJai Jackson. But I mean, they know I'm Chubby's daughter, right? That's why I'm a part of it.
Yep. We thank you for helping us tell this story, or your story, really. One thing, I guess, just to get this down, we're talking about your father's legacy, but also his connection to Long Island. So I know he grew up in Freeport. What's your connection? Where do you consider your hometown, or what's your memories of Freeport?
Well, I grew up in Freeport. My father was a very well-known TV personality in my younger growing up years. And I remember a lot of events that we would go to as a family. And I remember one in particular, when we lived in Freeport, there was a community pool right near our home. And it was called Casino Pool. And what he would do, he would promote that he would be appearing at that pool, and all the kids from his kiddie show would come with their parents and they would swim with him in the pool. And until this day, I still have this memory of watching all these kids, jumping on my dad and wanting to swim next to him. And he was throwing silver dollars into the pool, and they were, jumping in and diving in to get the money. And I would sit on the side waiting for him to finish so we could go get ice cream.
How would you describe Freeport?
Freeport was lovely. We lived, right near the water, and we had a boat in our backyard, and it just, it felt like it was our own private island, if you will. We had a lot of friends in the community. I grew up from grammar school up until, sixth grade. And so, we would get involved in community events and stuff, and it was a very comfortable place to live. I enjoyed living there.
In your mind, was your father primarily a TV personality, or did you know of his music background?
Well, I knew that he had a music background. I was on his TV show a couple of times, and I would hold cue cards for him and interact with all the children, because he would have a big band on his show, and he was showing children what jazz was. And so, I just jumped right in on that. And I knew he was famous, and I knew that a lot of people loved him and his music. And a couple of things that I remember when he would perform, he would do this ping with his pinky on one of the strings, and he would always do that for me and wink at me and make me giggle. Because, I would always have to sit on the sidelines and let daddy be daddy, because people, wanted his attention.
What do you remember what station that was on? Was it Channel 11, PIX, or?
Yes, WPIX. Well, he actually had a couple of shows. He had another show, a syndicated show on ABC in New York. And it was a variety show. He would bring on his friends, and he would have some young kids who were aspiring to be, musicians, and he would give them the spotlight and, give them accolades for how they're growing in their craft. And then he had a show on the WPIX show where he would wear a space suit. He would come on and he would talk about the next cartoon he was going to play and stuff like that. And they were all kiddie shows. He was always doing kiddie shows.
In terms of his jazz past or his playing days, what stories would he tell?
I remember one story he would tell that it was at the Apollo Theater in New York. And he said that he used to do an imitation of Billie Holiday singing, like Lover Man or something. And he did it on stage, and he said he was getting a round of applause that, really flipped him out. He couldn't believe that they really liked him. And unbeknownst to him, Billie Holiday was in the wings and came out with her arms crossed where he couldn't see her. And that's what they were applauding for, was her reaction to him doing an imitation of her. And he said that was one of the most embarrassing moments of his life.
So what would you say, or what have you learned about his reputation among musicians? It seems he was very active, like you're saying, a personality on stage. Did he like that role, or how do you think other?
Oh, he couldn't help that role. That was who he was. Woody Herman called him the buffoon of the bass. because he would come out, everybody would be in tuxedos, and my father would come out in a Foreign Legion outfit. And so he stuck out. He was the cheerleader of the Woody Herman band. And, if you listen to any of his older recordings, you'll hear him, when the band is really swinging and cooking, you'll hear him go, 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 or, like let out a big yell and, just really pumping up the band. That's what he was known for as the cheerleader. And that continued on in not only his professional life, but his personal life. I mean, when he passed away, my stepmom came up and she said, wherever we went and if we got separated, I never worried because I heard laughter and I knew where he was.
That's great. And what one of the early impressions I got just looking at pictures of him from various clubs from the 40s, he stood out visually. Like he didn't look like, I don't know what I had in my mind, but in terms of a jazzy musician, he seemed like a man out of time or just, he popped differently in photos that I saw.
Oh, yeah. He liked transforming himself. At one point, he was very overweight, and he decided that he was going to lose 100 pounds. And he did. Billie Holiday was the one that coined him Chubby. That's how he got his name, Chubby.
There's maybe some revenge on her part for that impersonation.
Yeah, very well be. I probably would have done the same thing, but what kind of made him a little upset was that when he lost 100 pounds, he thought he would be losing the name Chubby too, but no, they kept Chubby. But no, he would dye his hair blonde, and he would, he always had to have some kind of outfit that somebody would say, something about. He stood out, whether it be a hat or a jacket or something that made him feel as if he was expressing himself differently than others.
And this might sound strange to hear, but I've been doing a deep dive into your genealogy as research. And so your grandmother, Dorothy, and the vaudeville past of the family. What stories did you hear about that? And then do you have any memories of, I guess, your grandmother, Dorothy?
Well, I don't have memories of her because I was the youngest, but people have sent me music that she's composed. She was a singer and a pianist. And my grandfather was a vaudevillian as well, who was an actor and singer and dancer. And my father told me that he was at the Uris Theater doing a show, the Uris Theater in Manhattan, and doing a show and took a bow and then walked off the stage and collapsed and died. That's an interesting story, dying, with the last note in you, right after you're done. And later on, we went to New York for that Great Day in Harlem reenactment of the 1959 photo of all the jazz greats on a stoop in Harlem. And Life magazine and BET sponsored this event. And we went into Manhattan. We were in the hotel room. And when we opened up the curtains, the Uris Theater was right there. And he stood there staring at the Uris Theater like that's where my father took his last breath. It was very interesting to sense and feel what he was feeling at the time.
Yeah, I mean, he really was in the heart of the jazz world. Do you remember, or do you have any recollections from your years of meeting any jazz people, whether you knew who they were at the time or not?
Yeah, I remember vividly there was a jazz club right on Post Avenue in Westbury where I grew up later, called the Cork and Bib, and my father played there a lot. And I remember this man who bent down to me and looked me in the eye, and crystal blue eyes and beautiful silver hair, and smelled so beautiful in a gorgeous suit. And I looked up at him like, wow, who are you? And it was Gene Krupa. And it's a moment that I remember very vividly. His presence was very strong. But all of my father's friends, the Dizzy Gillespie, they were all like uncles to me because I was on the scene with him when I was young, and they were all stars playing gigs, and there I was. I didn't know who anybody was. Really, they were just musicians that played with my dad. And later on in life, when I realized who they were, I was like, wait a minute. My mom told me that we were on an airplane once going on somewhere with a bunch of all-stars, and I was only 2 years old, and I couldn't stop crying. And she said, Dizzy came over to me and said, give me that baby. And he picked me up and walked me up and down the aisle, blowing his cheeks out. And I was like, hee, hee, hee.
Another thing I'm learning through this process is the history of jazz, and from the 20s or earlier than that, but through the swing era and bop. And this is kind of a big picture question, but did your father have opinions, or, did he talk about the changes in jazz, or anything you would want to say about that?
Yeah, because he was so jovial on stage and making people happy, he had a very rough time accepting the musician who felt that they were too cool for school. The ones with the dropped eyelids and the cocked hip, and just not interacting with an audience. Or it used to upset him when Miles Davis would turn his back to the audience and play to the band. He would say, the audience paid money to see you and to feel you, and you're turning your back to them. He didn't like that. And he was very open about how the new set of musicians coming in, like Elvis Presley, he didn't really care for Elvis Presley because he felt that Elvis Presley ruined jazz, and all eyes went more into rock and roll than straight ahead jazz. That I remember for sure.
Right, and we talked to a few people. I guess there's a lot of factors, but the closing of all the big ballrooms, or that kind of social outlet, it wasn't quite the same audience they were playing to, I would imagine.
Yeah, a lot of musicians suffered from it. It was a very vivid shift, and they had to start finding other venues to play or bring their music. My father used to say, as a musician, it's either Carnegie Hall or Carnegie Deli. You got to get to wherever people will listen and enjoy you and get paid.
Because in this business, it's like a yo-yo being set free in an elevator. 1 minute, it's up and down life, right? Hey, how are you, everybody? The next day, you're like this.
Yeah.
On the bottom of the thing. Yeah. Looking for the back door to leave.
Yeah.
One thing I watched in preparation, there's a couple of interviews of him online, but he did an oral history that's in the Hamilton College collection, and he holds up at one point what looked like a manuscript, and he called it, the title was The Happy Monster, I think. Do you know if he wrote anything, or if anything became of an autobiography or memoir?
Well, I actually have that book, and he wrote the whole thing. He wrote a couple of books, but they never went to print, unfortunately. And that's something that's, sitting with me at this point, because I have a lot of the artifacts now. And so, yeah, he did write a book called The Happy Monster, and it had to do with, life on the road with Woody Herman and the various escapades that they all found themselves into on the road.
And not to put you on the spot, but do you have plans for that at any point, or?
Yes, I do. I'm focusing on a lot of things in reference to jazz, but I'm following in his footsteps by way of finding new talent to offer to the marketplace. He was known for that, bringing in some well-known artists to the Woody Herman band. And it's funny that I just sort of fell into that. I did jazz radio for a while. I'm known as the woman of jazz, even though I have a cold right now, but I do have a smooth-sounding voice on the air. And I really enjoyed finding artists that warranted some notoriety. And I would do something called jazz commercials. He would have loved knowing that term, where I would bring them on the air and we would talk about, their inspiration. We'd play a couple of tunes, and it wasn't about, who was your piano teacher. It was about what did you go through to write that ballad, more of a human element of listening and learning. And then I started the Jazz Network Worldwide, which was a social network, sort of like a Facebook of jazz. So, I made my mark in that way as far as my heritage and legacy is concerned. But my brother Duffy is the one who really went out there. He was the major musician in the family. And as you know, he passed away a couple of years.
Yeah, and it seemed like he and your father took great joy in playing together and both being musicians.
Oh, they had a lot of fun on stage. And musically, they just locked into the rhythm section like, the only father and drum team that in jazz that did that.
JJ's brother Duffy is worth a whole podcast on his own. Like her, he grew up around jazz greats, appeared on Chubby's shows, had a memorable appearance across from Jerry Lewis. He took to the drums at a young age, quickly made a name for himself. Duffy played for Dizzy Gillespie and the Count Basie Orchestra, among others. He missed his high school graduation to play a gig in Hollywood. Legend has it that Chubby put on his cap and gown and walked in his place. But to bring us full circle, Chubby passed away in California in 2003. He left behind a full life, a packed discography, and a legacy of passion and exuberance. More stories than we could include here. A happy monster indeed. So in an attempt to tie all our sections together on this episode, I'll do one last round with each of our experts, starting with Regina, still digging in those records.
In 1961, he was asked to be head of this entertainment committee after Mayor Sweeney became mayor. And he put this party together at Guy Lombardo's East Point House. And it was a party where there would be an orchestra on one level, there would be famous people from Broadway and Hollywood there, and of course there would have been a jazz band on another area of the restaurant. And he was the host and he was the MC, and he had written about doing that. But that was something very interesting that reading about him. He always came back to Freeport, and he would do fundraisers, and he did a show for the high school seniors, like a post-prom party. So he really seemed to love this community.
And now over to Scott. So the legacy of jazz, you don't see it as sort of a museum piece or forgotten art form. You think it's still a vibrant scene?
Well, I don't see it as a museum piece or an art form, really. The museum piece part, when people say that, then it becomes like classical music where you're supposed to play it a certain way. And yeah, this was great for the 20s and 30s, but it's dated now. Now it's replaced by whatever the pop music is. So that part I don't like. And the art form, well, it is an art form, but then again, there are a lot of art forms. And if you say that, then it sounds dry and, it sounds like, it's something to be looked at, but not really enjoyed. But jazz is actually a living, it's a life experience, really. It's continuous in that all eras and all styles of jazz are still being played today. They might not be getting as much attention from the media, but they're all in very good form.
And JJ.
Well, Freeport was definitely a home. It was a foundational home for me in my life, and I'd love to come back there one day and maybe put on a concert for everybody. And, as far as my work is concerned, the Jazz Network Worldwide and the Not Just Jazz Network are my babies. We're known globally. We have artistry in both of those networks from all over the world, and I pride myself on corralling so many different subsets of jazz that people could listen to and choose. And right now I'm in the process of creating a show called Give Your Love. With the landscape of the world right now, we all need to give each other a little bit more love and compassion and understanding and human kindness. And I plan on doing that through music and through some very innovative artist combinations coming together to bring their expression of what they believe the world is going through right now, and trying to heal us so we can all start really enjoying our lives again, and especially through music.
And how can we leave without an encore from Chubby? So this is an impromptu scat lesson.
1, 2, 3.
And if you want to honor the man, turn the volume up, roll down the window, and groove along. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, boo boo, do 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 do.